The footage you're watching has never been seen before on YouTube. For the first time, we get to see this legend moving and posing in high definition, exactly as he was during his prime in 1908. But we'll come back to this footage a little later once you understand who this man really was. One of the strongest of his era, the world heavyweight champion in wrestling. And far from being a brute, he spoke 7 languages and lectured philosophy at Ivy League universities. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the life of the Russian Lion, from how he was screwed over in one of the most controversial wrestling matches in history, to his connection with the origins of the hack squat and the bench press. This is the story of the one and only George Hackenschmidt. Born in 1877 in Tartu, Estonia, which at the time was a part of the Russian Empire, there was nothing particularly extraordinary about George Hackenschmidt's family. Both his parents were physically average, and his father ran a textile dyeing business. Though Hackenschmidt himself was anything but average. Even as a young lad, he was clearly stronger than his peers, and by the age of 8, he was already ordering around a small army of boys who naturally treated him as their leader. He was drawn to all forms of physical exercise and would spend hours in the school gymnasium whenever he had the chance. By the age of 14, he was winning local gymnastics competitions, and his instructor was so impressed that he began sharing Hackenschmidt's feats with the press. He was remarkably athletic. He could jump close to 5 meters in length, leap to his own height, and run 180 meters in just 26 seconds. When he finished school, Hackenschmidt moved to the larger city of Tallinn to begin an apprenticeship in engineering. While there, he joined the local athletic and cycling club, where he quickly discovered a real passion for cycling. As seemed to be a recurring theme, he excelled at whatever physical discipline he committed himself to, and before long he was winning prizes in local cycling competitions. When the colder autumn and winter months forced him indoors, he focused more heavily on training with weights, where once again it became clear that he was in a league of his own. It was around this time that a professional wrestler on tour named Georg Lurich visited town and issued an open challenge to anyone willing to face him. Hackenschmidt, only 18 years old with virtually no wrestling experience, decided to accept. Unsurprisingly, the seasoned professional took him down with relative ease, but that loss lit a fire in Hackenschmidt. He knew he was physically stronger than Lurich, and he became convinced that with proper training and experience he could beat him. That's an interesting detail because later on, once Hackenschmidt had become a world-famous wrestler, Lurich would often boast about having defeated him, all while carefully avoiding a rematch for many years. After this rough introduction to wrestling, Hackenschmidt spent the winter focused entirely on learning the sport. And as we've already come to expect, it didn't take long before he became the best wrestler in his club. By the end of the following year, in 1897, the 20-year-old Hackenschmidt had taken every opportunity he could to wrestle visiting professionals, learning from each defeat and steadily refining his technique. His weightlifting improved just as rapidly, and before long he even set a record in the strict overhead press with a 110-kilo barbell. Around this time, his instructor recorded his measurements at 174 centimeters tall and 80 kilos in body weight, with over 17-inch biceps, an 18-inch neck, and thighs measuring 23.5 inches. It was also during this period that Hackenschmidt suffered a minor injury while at work, which required a doctor's visit. By chance, his local doctor happened to have a distinguished colleague staying with him at the time, Dr. Krajewski, the personal physician to Tsar Nicholas II. When Hackenschmidt undressed so the doctor could examine his injuries, Krajewski immediately recognized that this was no ordinary 20-year-old. He was convinced Hackenschmidt possessed the potential to become the strongest man in the world, and he invited him to return with him to St. Petersburg to train as a professional athlete. Despite his family's pleas to stay on the engineering career path, Hackenschmidt felt that something else was calling him. Unwilling to let the opportunity pass, he packed up his stuff and moved to St. Petersburg. Before we follow him there, a quick moment to thank Robert Baraban for making this video possible. If you're into bronze and silver era bodybuilding, you've definitely heard of the chest expander. This is a really cool piece of old school equipment which you can still use today for a unique workout. Robert Baraban without a doubt makes the best chest expanders you can get. They're handmade in Austria, built entirely from steel with knurled handles that rotate, and they're adjustable up to 7 heavy-duty springs, so anyone from a beginner to a professional athlete can use and progressively overload the same expander. You can take it with you wherever you go and get a serious upper body workout. Let me tell you, if you've never used an expander before, the way it hits your upper back is unlike anything else you've ever experienced. It's really gonna surprise you. You can check out the expanders along with other top quality power products at shop.handgripper.net. If you enjoy the videos I make, checking out Robert Baraban's shop is genuinely the best way to support this channel. Thank you, and now back to our boy Hackenschmidt in St. Petersburg. Dr. Krajewski lived in a large house where he welcomed Hackenschmidt almost as a son and provided him with the best training environment he possibly could. At Krajewski's private club, Hackenschmidt was introduced to the broader principles of physical culture, alongside his regular training with heavy weights and constant wrestling practice. Many of the world's top professional strongmen passed through St. Petersburg's theaters, and nearly all of them visited Dr. Krajewski. In turn, he studied their methods closely, carefully weighing and measuring them, building an extraordinary base of knowledge that he passed on to his pupils. With no real distractions, Hackenschmidt occupied all his time with training and resting to be able to train some more. He drank 3 liters of milk per day and ate whatever his large appetite demanded. His strength exploded. Within months of his arrival, the club hosted the Russian weightlifting championship in April of 1898, where Hackenschmidt took first place with a 116 kilo snatch and a 122 kilo bent press, among other lifts. Around this time, he increased his strict overhead press to 125 kilos and his floor press to 152 kilos. There's a fun little story from this period involving Hackenschmidt's admiration for Dr. Krajewski's stylish trousers. He mentioned more than once that he would love to own a pair like them, to which the doctor jokingly replied that if Hackenschmidt ever beat Sandow's world record of lifting 116 kilos with one hand, he could have the pants. So when Hackenschmidt went on to perform the 122 kilo bent press, it wasn't the gold medal or having bested the legendary father of bodybuilding that pleased him the most. The highlight for him was simply walking away with a fresh pair of trousers from his mentor. With Hackenschmidt in such tremendous shape, Dr. Krajewski entered his name to compete in the European Wrestling Championships in Vienna that summer. Knowing this would be Hackenschmidt's first appearance in front of a large crowd, Krajewski wanted to make sure his nerves wouldn't affect his performance. To prepare him, he sent Hackenschmidt to perform in a circus in the city of Riga for several weeks, where he earned generous applause and defeated every opponent he encountered. At the competition in Vienna, Hackenschmidt was nothing short of dominant. His matches were quick and decisive, often over within minutes, sometimes within seconds, as he overpowered and tossed around far more experienced wrestlers. We're talking about a young man who had only started taking the sport seriously the year before, now being crowned the champion of Europe. Calling it a meteoric rise would be an understatement. The speed with which he brute forced his way to the top of the sport was basically unprecedented. Hackenschmidt himself later admitted that at this point he still possessed relatively little wrestling technique. He was simply so much stronger than the competition that it didn't even matter. This marked the beginning of his legendary run as a professional wrestler, earning him the nickname the Russian Lion, as he went on to compete in thousands of matches and remain undefeated for the following decade. In the spring of 1899, 1999, Hackenschmidt returned home and won the title of Wrestling Champion of Russia. That September, he traveled to France for the World Wrestling Championship, but after a couple of matches, he was forced to withdraw due to a shoulder injury. He took roughly half a year off to recover and resumed training in 1900. Then, in March of 1901, just weeks before the World Championship, Hackenschmidt received devastating news. Dr. Krajewski had died in a tragic accident. He had lost not only his mentor, but someone he considered a second father. Carrying that loss with him, Hackenschmidt went on to compete in the toughest tournament of his career in April of 1901. The world's best wrestlers gathered in Vienna to determine the greatest among them. Hackenschmidt dispatched most of his opponents with ease, defeating them in a matter of minutes. The only man who truly tested him was Ali Adali, known as the Terrible Turk. Their first bout lasted an exhausting hour and 18 minutes before the referee declared it a draw. They faced each other again the following day, and this time Hackenschmidt prevailed after 40 minutes, securing the World Championship and leaving the Terrible Turk in second place. It's a shame that Dr. Krajewski never lived to see it. From there, Hackenschmidt moved to England in 1902 in search of new opponents, something he struggled with since Greco-Roman wrestling wasn't especially popular there. It was in England that he began learning a new style known as catch-as-catch-can wrestling. Unlike Greco-Roman, which only allows attacks above the waist and revolves around balance and big throws, catch wrestling permits attacks to the legs, placing more emphasis on tripping, submissions, and the generally scrappier kind of fight. Even with this new, unfamiliar style, Hackenschmidt accepted every match he was offered and remained undefeated. He toured the country until his most notable engagement in July of 1904 at the Royal Albert Hall, where he was faced against the American heavyweight champion Tom Jenkins, in front of an audience of 6,000. Wrestling under Greco-Roman rules, Hackenschmidt made short work of Jenkins, and with no serious challengers left in England, he toured Australia from late 1904, once again dominating all opposition. From there, he traveled to the United States for a rematch with Jenkins, this time on American soil at Madison Square Garden on May 4th, 1905, and now under catch-as-catch-can rules. Once again, the Russian Lion prevailed decisively. The American press wrote that Jenkins was handled like a pygmy in the hands of a giant, and that Hackenschmidt broke holds as if they were the clutchings of a child. It was after this match that Hackenschmidt was declared the world's first heavyweight champion in catch-as-catch-can wrestling. No matter the opponent, the rules, or the location, the result was always the same. Hackenschmidt stood alone as the undisputed best wrestler in the world. This is a good moment to revisit the posing I showed at the beginning of the video. This extremely rare film was recently restored, digitized, and provided to me by an archive in New Zealand. It's a real privilege to have access to footage of this quality. Here we see Hackenschmidt flexing in 1908, shortly after defeating the American Joe Rogers at the Oxford Music Hall in London. From the front, he already looks thick and powerful, but it's when he turns around that you really understand how intimidating it must have been to face him in the ring. The width of his back is astonishing. Very few people at the time would have seen anything like it. The way the erectors rise up into the traps and disappear straight into the neck gives him a solid, uninterrupted mass. At his physical peak, Hackenschmidt weighed between 95 and 100 kilos, at a height of around 176 centimeters. His arms measured over 18 inches, which is impressive on its own, but it's nothing compared to his neck, which measured over 20 inches. And here's the thing, at the time, a lot of people genuinely believed heavy weight training would hurt an athlete, that it would make you stiff, slow, even weaken the heart. Hackenschmidt pretty clearly destroyed that notion. He believed heavy lifting was the secret to athletic superiority, and his entire wrestling career backed that up. Again and again, he simply outmuscled everyone he faced. Which brings us to 1908 in Chicago, which is still widely regarded as the most controversial wrestling match of all time. By this point, Hackenschmidt was one of the most famous athletes on the planet. He was immensely popular across Europe and admired even in the United States. During his visit, he met President Theodore Roosevelt, who famously remarked that if he were not president, he would like to be George Hackenschmidt. His challenger was Frank Gotch, the American catch-as-catch-can champion, a tough and clever wrestler from Iowa who had built his reputation almost entirely on home soil. The match was billed as the athletic contest of the century and took place at the Dexter Park Amphitheater, with roughly 10,000 spectators in attendance. The media was in a frenzy over this match, and promoters didn't shy away from exploiting the nationalism of it. We had this farm boy, the local American hero, taking on the Russian lion. From the very beginning of the match, the contrast between the two men was painfully obvious. Hackenschmidt, coming from a European Greco-Roman background, was used to competing with a strict set of rules and a strong sense of fair play. Gotch, on the other hand, came up in the looser American catch-as-catch-can style, where bending the rules was often considered part of the game. Hackenschmidt immediately went on the offensive, looking to end the match quickly and decisively, as he almost always did. But before long, he realized something was wrong. Every time he managed to secure a grip on Gotch, his opponent slipped away. Again and again, Gotch slid cleanly through his hands. It soon became clear why. Gotch had greased up his entire body from head to toe. Hackenschmidt later noted that even Gotch's hair smelled strongly of gasoline. Hackenschmidt complained to the referee and requested that both men be sent back to the locker rooms to shower before continuing. The request was flatly denied. From that point on, the match turned into a drawn-out and frustrating stalemate. Hackenschmidt continued to press the action, while Gotch refused to engage cleanly. Whenever the two did come together, Gotch resorted to tactics that were openly illegal: eye gouging, scratching, headbutting, and even punching. Hackenschmidt protested repeatedly, but the referee ignored every complaint. The match dragged on for nearly 2 hours, with Gotch largely on the defensive the entire time. Hackenschmidt was not accustomed to wrestling for that length of time, and certainly not under such conditions. Exhausted, bruised, and bleeding, he eventually asked the referee to declare the match a draw. The request was denied. At that point, having followed the rules to the letter throughout the contest, Hackenschmidt declared, "I surrender the championship of the world to Mr. Gotch." He shook Gotch's hand and walked out of the ring. The immediate reaction was explosive. American flags were waved, the crowd rushed the ring, and Gotch was proclaimed the new champion of the world. But then came the controversy. American newspapers were sharply divided. Some praised Gotch's conditioning and tactics, framing the match as a triumph of skill over brute strength. Others were openly critical, condemning both the referee and Gotch's behavior. British and European papers were even harsher, describing the bout as a brutal farce and insisting that Hackenschmidt had withdrawn from an unsportsmanlike exhibition rather than being legitimately defeated. It seemed quite clear that some degree of collusion happened between Gotch and the referee. If Gotch had truly believed the rules would be enforced, he likely wouldn't have entered the ring thoroughly oiled, risking immediate disqualification in such a high-profile title match. That decision, combined with the constant unchecked fouling that followed, raises serious questions about who the referee was actually working for. Hackenschmidt's reputation in England remained intact. If anything, it was strengthened. Many admired the fact that he had competed honorably, even when faced with an opponent who did not. It wasn't long before calls for a rematch began to grow. Hackenschmidt and Gotch met for the second time in 1911. To build up the hype, the promoters brought Hackenschmidt to the United States early and sent him on a nationwide tour to raise his profile ahead of the rematch. The event itself was held in a brand new, even larger stadium in Chicago, drawing a crowd of around 30,000 spectators, making it the biggest wrestling match ever staged in the United States at the time. Ironically, it would also mark the beginning of the end of professional wrestling as a legitimate athletic contest in the country. You see, during the promotional tour just weeks before the match, Hackenschmidt suffered a devastating knee injury, and even this came with controversy. Years later, another wrestler, Ad Santel claimed that he had been paid $5,000 by Gotch's camp to deliberately injure Hackenschmidt during training.
They put $5,000 in Ad Santel's hand, and that would be like putting maybe $5 million in your hand today, because that was a lot of money at that time. And Ad Santel was a great hooker, so he put a step-over toe hold on Hackenschmidt in a training session, which was supposed to be a friendly training session, and tore his knee up.
Hackenschmidt himself never publicly confirmed this, so the claim can't be stated as fact. In any case, the knee injury was so severe that Hackenschmidt attempted to forfeit the match before it even began. But the bout went ahead anyway, largely because Jack Curley, one of the promoters and a close friend of Hackenschmidt, had invested enormous sums of money into the event and stood to lose everything if it were cancelled. We don't know whether it was coercion from Curley or just Hackenschmidt's sense of loyalty that made him agree to wrestle, but basically he went into it knowing he had no chance of winning. As soon as the match began, the outcome was obvious. Hackenschmidt was effectively wrestling on one leg, and Gotch wasted no time exploiting the injury. The contest ended in less than 20 minutes, with Hackenschmidt forced to concede. It was a disaster. The crowd, having been promised a clash of titans, instead witnessed a short and deeply unsatisfying match that should have never taken place. Feeling that the whole event was rigged, spectators booed and shouted as Hackenschmidt shamefully left the stadium. He didn't speak to the press afterward, he didn't offer explanations or excuses, he simply wanted to be left alone. Hackenschmidt boarded a train to New York and took the first ship he could find back to Europe, and with that, the 34-year-old's wrestling career was over. But Hackenschmidt's legacy went far beyond wrestling. In 1908, Health and Strength published his first book titled The Way to Live. Over the following decades, through dozens of revised editions, it would go on to become one of the most influential and best-selling physical training books ever written. Unlike many other figures of his era, Hackenschmidt wasn't trying to build a business empire around it. There were no proprietary machines, no miracle systems, no branded institutes bearing his name. He really just wanted to share his knowledge with the world with one simple book. At its core, The Way to Live promoted balance, moderation, and longevity. Hackenschmidt believed strength training and health went hand in hand. He emphasized free weights, outdoor movement, rest, and consistency. He was deeply skeptical of shortcuts and gimmicks. To him, strength was not something to be rushed or exploited. It was something to be cultivated patiently over a lifetime. Many people credit Hackenschmidt as the inventor of the hack squat, and some even go as far as to say the bench press, but the reality isn't quite that simple. To start with, the hack squat machine we associate with the exercise today was certainly not invented by Hackenschmidt. What he did popularize, and what he considered his favorite leg exercise, was squatting with the weight held in the hands behind the body, which is loosely the movement modern machines are meant to replicate. In The Way to Live, this is the first exercise he recommends for leg training. He notes that in Germany, the movement is known as the Hacke, meaning heel, referring to the exercise being performed with the heels together. So there's an interesting coincidence at play here. The name of his favorite exercise sounds almost identical to his own, and he promoted it as his #1 leg exercise in what would become the best-selling training book ever. So it's easy to see how over time, Hackenschmidt came to be remembered as the inventor, even if he wasn't the first person to ever perform the movement. It's a similar story with the bench press. Benches, as we know them, simply didn't exist in gyms at the time. What Hackenschmidt was known for, however, was his exceptional strength in the floor press. As mentioned earlier, he famously pressed 152 kilos in his younger days, and the floor press was another exercise he promoted in his book. So we could say he helped popularize horizontal pressing in a time when training usually just involved vertical pressing. Though what really separates Hackenschmidt from most strength icons of his era is what came next. As he grew older, he became increasingly critical of rigid systems, including his own. He began to question whether standardized routines were helpful at all. He argued that no two bodies were the same and that blindly following prescribed movements could do more harm than good. In later writings, he even suggested that excessive instruction itself was a problem, that people had lost the ability to listen to their own bodies. As he grew older, Hackenschmidt gradually turned more philosophical. He began writing and lecturing on broader ideas about human development, health, and consciousness. Much of his later life was spent immersed in academic reading and discussion, as he spoke at major universities across Europe and the United States. As Hackenschmidt became more reflective, he also became less interested in being remembered as a wrestler. He never tried to capitalize on his fame. He avoided spectacle. He refused to exaggerate his own accomplishments. Even when discussing his wrestling career, he downplayed his dominance and always acknowledged his limitations. He didn't romanticize the past, and he certainly didn't try to turn it into a brand. Yet, it's hard to overstate just how big of a deal Hackenschmidt was in the first half of the 20th century. England, where he spent much of his career, effectively adopted him as a national treasure. His name itself became common currency, a byword for strength, physical development, and grappling ability. Children prone to roughhousing were scolded as little Hackenschmidts. Pub brawlers were dismissed as would-be Hackenschmidts. And well into the 1930s and 40s, newspapers could casually refer to the Hackenschmidts of industry without needing any further explanation. In retirement, Hackenschmidt was openly disappointed with the direction professional wrestling took as a sport. He often remarked that anything after World War I was fake, and he refused the many offers he received to return as a referee or official in later tournaments. Even so, he remained in remarkable physical condition well into old age. In his 80s, he was still running up to 7 miles a day and could perform high jumps, clearing obstacles the height of chairs. Hackenschmidt lived through both world wars. He survived internment in Germany during World War I and later endured the Nazi occupation of France during World War II. Hackenschmidt died in 1968 at the age of 90. To finish, it feels right to let Hackenschmidt speak for himself in his own words and remember him the way he wanted to be remembered. These are the closing lines of The Way to Live. Throughout my whole career, I have never bothered as to whether I was a champion or not a champion. The only title I have desired to be known by is simply my name, George Hackenschmidt.